All right, all right. Welcome, everybody. All right, so we are continuing in the endless efforts to review every single video on all of the internet on metaethics. I even did a Twitter thread recently. There's also podcasts I want to do, but I don't know, how do I stream a podcast? Do I just like stream from like a Spotify window? They're not going to like that, right? Like Spotify won't let me do that, so I don't know how to stream it. I don't know how that works. So there is this podcast episode I'd really like to cover. In fact, there's two of them I'd really like to cover, but I don't know where to stream them from. Like, you can't stream it from the Apple website. They're gonna be like, no, you can't do that. I don't know. As long as it's free somewhere, I don't know how it works. All right. So for the people that are first and second, you got to be first once I'm here. So Papaya Thief has stolen, like a good papaya thief, the first place spot. So that's 1,000 Lance loot. Jackass gets 500. And I guess we'll wait for the third. So for the real time in Flaming Hell, you gotta pop in there. Okay, let me set this aside. Don't want to have that up here. Now I'm a little unsure what video to review. So we have a Cliff Connectley video. It says Cliff Connectley challenges moral relativism. Can you live without absolute morals? So let's do another vote. Let's do. All right, I got to open up the window on YouTube to have everybody do a vote on this. We've only got 7 people here, so we'll keep it open for a few minutes and see where we get with it. I guess I'll play a short one if we end up waiting a long time. So let's see. Start a poll. We've got all right, the Cliff Connectley one. We've got, let's see, not that one. We've got Do Morals Prove God Exists? We've got Alex O'Connor. And finally, we've got Does Morality Make Sense Without God? Okay, so vote on those. So what's up, everybody? I've only got maybe about an hour and 15. I probably won't be back after that today because I got an early morning tomorrow. So there should be a couple guest discussions that I have coming up fairly soon. Not a whole lot being planned lately. I've been swamped with work, so yeah, I've just had a lot of work to do. And if I get some spare time, I'll be working on papers rather than doing too many more videos. So it's going to be a slow, honestly, slow next year. It's going to be a slow year. So the channel will be going into not hibernation, but into like a slow mode. I don't know. For maybe a year, and then probably the summer after this one, I'll be kicking things back into high gear. So it's going to be a while. And I am building a home, so I'll finally, you've all seen me bouncing around apartments and having different setups. So I will finally have like a true, genuine like space to set up my own office and everything. And that'll be about next summer. So around that time, I'll finally start to be settling in. But for this next year, I do have some announcements about stuff that's going to be going on that's going to keep me tied up. And I think you'll all be quite happy with that. Oh, Mason, you are going to get. Why do I decide? Like, I'm like, you are going to get, and you get. Like, I can't figure out which sentence I want to say. So I start one and then stop it and start just pick a sentence. What is wrong with me? I don't know why I've been like this lately. Anyway, Mason, you get 250 Lance loot. And what's up, Filipina Vegana? Goblin Lord is here. Real time. Yeah, you were too early. So, what do they say? The early bird gets the worm. You were like the bird out at midnight or something. No worms. All right. So let's have a look at the votes. Oh, wow. I got 11 votes. All right. I'll close it as soon as we get 12 votes. So we're just going to need a 12th person to vote. So as soon as I see a 12th vote, I'm going to end the poll. I'm surprised by that. That's cool. I'm glad that it picked up that many votes that quickly. That's neat. It looks like, wait, well, with 12 votes, does morality make sense without God? Does that even have a chance of losing? Okay. Oh wait, there was a vote and then it went away. What was that? Okay, there we go. Done. All right. So does morality make sense without God? All right. Here's the video. It's the channel's called In Between Sundays. I don't know what the channel is. I just do searches for moral realism, moral relativism, that sort of stuff. So let's get into it. All right. Flaming Hell says, my mission in life is always end up doing something that just barely makes me not get Lance Loot. I'm eventually going to have to do something. Are people keeping track? Because I'm not keeping track of who's got the Lance Loot. You got to figure that out for yourselves. Okay. Here's the video. And let's see. Audio should be good. Let's bump up the speed a little bit. I always get frustrated when audio is really slow. I don't know. I talk really fast, so I'm not talking real fast right now. Maybe I haven't had enough caffeine. All right, we good to go? Let's go.
Complicate the idea of morality? Or
it's kind of started like,
does God complicate the idea of morality? Or can you really have a solid framework of morality without God that works in society? Let's talk about it. I was on X and I came across this video with a guy named Hunter Avalon. I really don't know who he is. It's not me trying to do like a subtle insult. I truly don't know who he is. Way less people know who I am anyway, so why would I insult him like that? But apparently he's an atheist from what I can see just online. I want to play you a few videos of him saying or criticizing theism and the idea of God and morality with God. Check this out.
Is that I think any argument of morality will at some point down the line arrive at an argument of religion.
You don't need God for morality, first and foremost.
You don't need God for morality.
Because that actually makes things more difficult. Now I have to convince the guy who thinks it's fun to kill people that actually it's bad to kill people because God says so. And then I have to convince him about God. And then I have to convince him that my God is right.
Okay, so that's the first.
So before we get into this guy's commentary, so I'm commenting on someone's commentary, which is going to be fun. Hunter Avalon's argument here doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So you don't need God for morality because, and then he goes on to make a point about it being a considerable argumentative burden. Like if you were thrust into a situation in which you had to convince someone of your moral standards, you have to say, okay, well, God exists, my particular God exists, my particular God endorses these particular moral values, and so you should abide by these particular moral values. So the idea here seems to be that from a argumentative standpoint, it would be extremely burdensome to persuade others if you thought that morality was dependent on God. Okay, that's not a particularly good reason to think that you don't need God for morality. That doesn't seem to follow from that. So I don't know exactly what the reasoning is here. If you're making a practical point about the practical difficulties of persuading people, if one appealed to a specific theological conception of the good, that would be fine. Yeah, it could be difficult to persuade someone of that particular conception. And maybe it would be more difficult than some other sort of conception. But that would be a practical question about the relative difficulty of persuading people of particular moral perspectives. That would have very little to do directly with whether those perspectives are defensible or not. This is not a good argument, from an atheist.
First criticism. God makes morality more complicated because if there's someone that likes to kill people, I can't just tell him killing people is wrong. I have to convince him about my God. And I have to, I got to go through the argument from design. I got to go like biogenesis and stuff like that. That's kind of what he's saying. So it's really complicated. God overcomplicates the morality conversation because you first have to make someone respect God, believe that he exists, let alone respect his rules in order to get them to comply. And that sounds like it makes a lot of sense. But what's the alternative?
Instead,
Yeah, so he says that makes a lot of sense. I think he's giving too much credit to Hunter here. Now, if we wanted to steelman Hunter, we might say something that it goes beyond this practical question. Maybe there's some implicit view that you can persuade people by a more direct appeal to their own moral standards or something like that. And so it's not just that it would be really impractical to appeal to a God, but that it would be totally unnecessary. And that to get people to adopt your moral standards or the correct moral standards or whatever it might be, there are resources that would be available to both the theistic realist or whatever the person who grounds their moral beliefs in God and the secular person. They're available to both. And so you don't need to have this extra steps. There's a bunch of extra steps you don't need it all because you could already persuade them with a lot fewer resources. Again, it still sounds like a practical consideration, but I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a point in favor of saying, like, maybe he might say argumentatively, you don't need to appeal to God to persuade people. That might be true, but there's a separate question from what's going to be effective at persuading people, and then which position is correct or not. And it doesn't sound like he's drawing a clear distinction between those. And there I go with the metaethics coughs. I don't cough. I'm not going around coughing all day. I start a stream and I start coughing. I don't get it. Oh, right. Real Time says, have you covered the section of Sam Cedar's Jubilee video where the topic of ethics comes up? I have not. And I do know there's a short section. So that is something that I could cover, especially if you get through this. Is a fairly short video. All right. And so I'll do that next if we finish this in the next hour or so.
Can do is say, evolutionarily, we have evolved to be social creatures. If we have humans that are just murdering for fun, senselessly, society will collapse unless that behavior is done away with. This comes from a collective interest in benefiting all of society.
I love when people give this as
Yeah, so Hunter's making some weird points here. Like, he's making this some sort of appeal to biological evolution, but then stuff about the collective interest of all society. Natural selection doesn't typically operate at the societal level. So what exactly is he arguing here? Is he arguing for natural selection and biological evolution having equipped us with certain sorts of pro-social evolved psychological sentiments that make us pro-social towards society as a whole? Because that's a tall order empirically. I don't even think that there's particularly good evidence of that. If instead he's making some argument about cultural evolution, it's not very clear that he's doing that. Typically, when people just talk about evolution without clarification, they're talking about evolution in the biological sense. Natural selection, shaping genes, which go into shape, proteins that shape the phenotypes that we have, and that in the case of psychology would manifest as changes to our nervous system, changes to our neurophysiology, and changes to, our behavior ultimately. Is that what he's talking about, or is he talking about cultural evolution? And if he is talking about a cultural evolution, it would be helpful to make clarification there, because if he is talking about biological evolution, this is a rather dubious claim that Hunter is making here. So we don't need religion because of, it sounds like maybe he's mixing practical considerations about what would be in our benefit, to our benefit, and evolutionary considerations. Natural selection operates to promote reproductive fitness, not to promote our interests. It's not like my interest or your interest are exclusively reducible to reproductive fitness. That would be ridiculous. Like, there's lots of things that I'm interested in that are either unrelated to reproductive fitness or may even run contrary to acting in my reproductive interest. So, for whatever reason, atheists often graft themselves on to rather crude conceptions of the role that evolution plays in human behavior. Humans evolved to be cultural creatures. We evolved to pick up and absorb the norms, standards, and values of the cultures around us. Those norms are not always necessarily going to be directly conducive to our reproductive fitness. It's just that over the course of human evolutionary history, developing the capacity to be the sort of organism that can be enculturated, that is what was adaptive. It does not mean that any given set of cultural practices is going to be adaptive from the standpoint of enhancing a reproductive fitness. They could be maladaptive in some cases, and sometimes they are. Think of cults where all the members of the cult, in their lives, out of whatever belief that they have, they did not enhance their reproductive fitness. Or think of religious movements where people take vows of celibacy, or think of instances in which the social situations that people find themselves in prompt them to no longer want to reproduce. There's lots of cases like that. You could squint and maybe get an argument out of it that in some of these cases they are enhancing the reproductive fitness of close family members, and sometimes that occurs in some situations. There's certainly organisms that do this. So eusocial insects do this, like ants and bees will promote the interests of their close kin. Most of them are not reproducing, but it's very implausible that that's happening with all the human social groups that have arose. So it's our culturality, our susceptibility to cultural evolution, that is the biological adaptation that we have that has made us such a successful organism. It does not mean that any particular cultural practice is adaptive. And often when people talk about, when atheists talk about morality coming from evolution, they are woefully unprepared to unpack the details of what that means and what that would amount to. If you're looking for what I consider to be the best entry point into this, I would check out Evolution of Morality. It's a chapter in the moral psychology. I believe it's the Moral Psychology Handbook, which should be edited by John Doris and Sean Nichols. Man, what was that? 2011 now? It's back a few years. I remember when it was like fresh and new. So it's the first chapter of that book called Evolution of Morality by Edward Mashery and Ron Mallon. And what they do in that book is they disambiguate three different respects in which one might mean what one might mean if one were to say morality evolved. I'll give a rundown just because I think it's such a good chapter. So they say, look, when someone says morality evolved, you could mean that some of the psychological components involved in moral judgment evolved. So this could be like emotions are a product of natural selection, and emotions are involved in moral judgment and reasoning, stuff like disgust, outrage, a sense of vengeance, that sort of thing. And, the case for that's pretty plausible that some of those adaptations, some of those characteristics we exhibit are adaptations that are a product of natural selection, and they are involved in morality, but that doesn't mean that we have like a special type of moral reasoning or moral cognition. Then they say, okay, well, maybe a capacity for thinking in normative terms could be a product of natural selection. And they think that there's a plausible evidential case for that. And then finally, you have the much richer conception of morality as a distinct type of normative cognition. And they give Richard Joyce's account in the evolution. He has a book called Evolution of Morality, or is it The Evolution of Morality? I can't remember. I don't know. It's I don't have it here. It's in my office to grab the title of that. It's got a really cool cover on it too. So it's cool. It's a cool book. And so Joyce lays out this very detailed account of what he thinks the types of the type of moral judgment that evolved. We have an evolved predisposition to engage in a certain kind of moral reasoning where our moral judgments exhibit these particular set of metanormative characteristics. And then they argue that Mashery and Mallon argued the evidence for that is not particularly good. So you have these three things. Some of the psychological components of morality evolved. Yeah, plausible. And you would have to assess that on a case-by-case basis, and it's pretty hard to do. Then you have normative cognition evolved. They think that that's plausible. And then you have third, a distinctive capacity for thinking in specifically moral terms evolved. They don't think that there's particularly good evidence for that. Mashery has done follow-up research, which supports some of the skepticism that he expresses there, along with a research team that's done cross-cultural research around the world, looking at how people categorize norms into different categories. Like if you ask people, basically give them a bunch of norms and have them box them. And they don't box them. They don't categorize things as moral or non-moral in quite the same way as people from weird, that's Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic societies do. And so what he thinks, Mashery argues, and this is in the Atlas of Moral Psychology, where the editor should be Kurt Gray. He argues that the concept of morality as a distinctive notion is a culturally constructed idea. It's historically contingent. We don't have this like universal shared conception of morality as this distinct domain. And Stephen Stitch in that same volume has a paper called The Moral Domain, where he argues that there is no moral domain. And I find the arguments fairly compelling. I think that's probably right. And I think that this notion of morality, of things being right and wrong, is a contingent sociocultural artifact of monotheism and certain religious influences having influenced society down a particular historical trajectory. It could have gone differently. We didn't have to think of normativity in quite that way. It didn't have to be this Manichaean dichotomy between good and evil, right and wrong. It could have had taken some other form. It could have been three categories, or it could have been non-categorical. So it could have gone quite differently than it has gone. And that's what I think. I don't think we have this innate good, bad, right, wrong mentality. I think it's learned. Okay, but I want to hear what the host has to, or like the other reviewer has to say. So we'll take it back a little.
If we have humans that are just murdering for fun, senselessly, society will collapse unless that behavior is done away with. This comes from a collective interest in benefiting all of society.
I love when people give this as the alternative. I love when people give this as the alternative. This is what is so important to do. Whenever someone criticizes the morality, like in the Bible or something like that, and they say it's evil, ask them, what's the alternative? I mean, really, like, what is the alternative?
Well, there's lots of alternatives. So this is not a particularly difficult question to answer. Unfortunately, I don't think Hunter's answer is particularly good. My answer is my standards and values. So, people can scoff at that and balk at that, but ultimately, what else are you going to depend on? So in any case in which you're given some external set of standards, you're going to have to evaluate or judge for yourself whether or not those are good standards or whether or not you want to comply with them. I skip the middleman and I act on my own principles and values. Simple as that. So if theists or secular moral realists would say that that's arbitrary or ungrounded, yeah, I don't care. What's the problem with that? So people can scoff and bulk at the anti-realists' conception of value, but I don't care. The scoffing and bulking are not objections, and I don't particularly care if they want to object to that. If they want to tell me why I'm incorrect, be my guest.
And explain to me why that's better. And
oh no, philosopheric. I thought it was philosophunculus for a bit. Philosopheric is scoffing and balking. Yeah, well, I'm busy not caring.
he's actually going to get pressed on this. So he basically says so here's why God complicates morality, because in order for someone to do what you want them to do, you can't just tell them that what they're doing is wrong. You have to convince them about your idea and that your idea of God is right. So instead, here's what I do. I tell someone that it's wrong, and then I convince them about my idea. And I tell them that my idea, it's the same thing.
So the person criticizing, I know that we have the channel name here. Again, it's In Between Sundays. Yeah, In Between Sundays. I don't know his name. Sorry, I didn't. And it's funny because he started the video saying he doesn't know who Hunter. So none of us know who anybody is. We're just commenting on each other's work. So yeah, I'll say the same thing. It's not intended as an insult. I just wanted to review a video on moral realism. So does it say his name somewhere in here? No, it doesn't. Okay. Oh wait. By Marco Arroyo. Okay, is that your name? Okay, if that's your name, then what's up? Okay, so I think he's right here. So the point he's making here about Hunter's, so Hunter's like, hey, you don't want to go the God route because you'd have to argue for what God there is, and then make the case for God, and then make the case that God supports these morals that you're arguing for, and blah blah blah. And his point here is, okay, but then Hunter's just swapping out that burden with some alternative burden. It's the same thing. I agree. And this is a good criticism of what Hunter's saying here. So far, I'm agreeing with the critic of that's reviewing the video that I'm reviewing. So yeah, so I agree. It's a good critique. All right. So Jamie Russell here says moral realism is true if you believe the Bible as a worldview. So if you haven't seen my discussion with David Pullman, do go check that out. David Pullman is a Christian and he is not a moral realist. And this is something that I've asked Christians before. Is there any scriptural basis for the view that the Bible endorses moral realism, or that moral realism is some sort of entailment of Christian belief? I haven't seen any good reasons to believe that that's the case. I don't think Christianity is inconsistent with moral anti-realism, and I don't really see why Christians seem so dead set on supporting moral realism. Contemporary views about moral realism are largely as far as I could tell, a recent secular invention. They have vestiges or influences of monotheism and Christianity, perhaps in the metaphysics and the sort of thing that are motivating moral realists to want to support moral realism, especially non-naturalist realists. And there's going to be Western philosophical influences of Plato and stuff. But I don't think Christianity needs realism. And I don't know why Christians are so convinced that Christianity gets you realism so easily. I don't think that it does. And I don't think that it matters. I don't think it's like a mark against Christianity if it were to discard moral realism. All right. Jamie Russell says he is wrong. I was there. Sin is a concept. Yeah, but nothing about sin. I've never seen a description of sin that requires it to be construed as stance independently, right or wrong. So when you say there are sins that God can judge all image bearers by, yeah, but how is that inconsistent with anti-realism? What's the problem?
All right. Now, if it's the same thing, are these two things equal? So I have to convince someone about God and objective morality, and then you have to convince someone about your evolutionary reasons. Are these two things equal? No, not at all. The evolutionary concept is way weaker, and it's way weaker for a reason that you're about to see, because he's going to get.
Well, that's not very plausible. I mean, I don't know if Hunter's particular account that he would offer is likely to be very compelling or not, but the case for evolution is better than the case for the existence of God.
Pressed on this.
We don't need
So
religion.
you're just
for
saying
this.
So
you shouldn't do it because
morality-
it's unpractical.
Right.
No, I'm doing it
morality
because
view-
I care about me. I don't want to live in a world where I get murdered. I don't want to live in a world where my daughter is at risk of getting
You
murdered.
want the
Or
serial killer to realize that you don't want to get murdered, so he shouldn't murder people.
no, that's why we
that's-
collectively
that's
as humans will say that
human.
serial killer is wrong. The serial killer might not think it's wrong. And if he has no sense of knowing it's wrong, then he's a psychopath. And if we allow deliberate harming of other humans, then society will crumble.
I love it when people say we collectively, we collectively. Andrew Wilson just debated a secular humanist, and I might react to this video, but the guy was saying that same thing, using the word collective all the time. And this is actually a problem that I exposed in the recent video where Alex O'Connor debated Daily Dose of Wisdom on morality and emotivism, where he's saying, like, if we all kind of agree on this, and that's good, we're agreeing on morality, that's what we want. And so if we just collectively can agree on this, the outliers, we can deal with them. Now, what if collectively we agree on racism? What if collectively we say that racism is a good thing and we want to bring back the KKK, for example? What if collectively we say that, you know, ending people's lives who are innocent and don't deserve it, that's a good thing? What if we go back to like the morality of the Aztecs and the Mayans when it comes to like sacrificing the young and things like that, or just sacrificing people in general? What if collectively we all decided that stuff was great? Are those things now good?
I wonder what the objection here is supposed to be. I mean, you could extract an objection out of this, but a point I would make about this is, well, if we agreed to those things, we would agree to those things. Relative to my current standpoint, that would be bad. But if we all thought those things were good, then it would be a descriptive fact that we would think those things are good. I'm quite happy that we don't think those things because I think they're bad. I really don't want to think those things. But what is the objection here? So it's not that I don't think you can't pull an objection out of this, but as stated, a relativist could just lean on the fact that, yeah, if we thought those things, we would think those things. And they could say, and I just construe morality in purely descriptive terms. I have certain moral standards. If I had different moral standards, I'd have different moral standards. What exactly is the objection? The objection is, yeah, but that would be bad. Okay, so that would be an appeal to consequences. That's not going to get you a whole lot of places. So if we wouldn't like that outcome, wouldn't be a good reason to reject the view. If instead you think something like, well, it would be counterintuitive, or I find it to be very implausible that the best construal of what I mean and what you mean and how we think about morality is that morality is radically contingent in that way. And so if your view has that implication, that's a reason to reject your view. That's not an objection. You know, David Pullman, I think, has mentioned that he thinks a lot of these objections to anti-realist views are appeals to consequence. And there might be some cases where people are crudely making that sort of error, but I don't think they typically are. I think they're typically, it's something closer to like a reductio ad absurdum, where what they're trying to show is that there's an implication of adopting the metaethical perspective that on reflection appears to be absurd. And that's taken to be a reason to think that therefore the view is wrong. So it's not that the view is incorrect because it has bad consequences, but rather that if the view were true, it would have entailments about what you would be committed to that you would think, okay, well, I don't think that those entailments, I'm not going to support a moral theory that has entailments that are so objectionable. And so I'm going to reject the moral theory. It's going to be false. And that would be some sort of appeal to reflective equilibrium and some inconsistency with your intuition, some sort of standard analytic thing. And I would find that objectionable on other grounds, not an appeal to consequence, but just that I don't even think that philosophical intuitions of the relevant kind exist at all in the first place. So I would have deeper methodological worries about that, but they would be different than an appeal to consequence worry.
Is it just that what the majority holds to be correct, the collective belief of all the people? That's what makes things good. What do you do in that situation? And Alex O'Connor, and respectfully so, said, yeah, that's kind of a problem for my belief system in emotivism. We don't.
Yeah, I don't think Alex should say that. I think Alex is conceding too much. I don't think emotivists or anti-realists have any problems at all. So when it comes to trying to persuade people as an anti-realist, you try to appeal to their goal standards or values. If they really do have fundamentally different values than you, then you may have no choice but to impose your standards on them against their will or to fight them or something like that. This is going to be as true for the realist as it is for the anti-realist. It's not like realists have a huge advantage here. You could present someone with what you take to be the best case for the stance of independent moral facts, and they could shrug and say they don't care. So unless you're some sort of motivational internalist that thinks if you convince someone of what's morally true, they're going to go, oh my gosh, and then comply. But then you're going to have to defend the case, defend that that's the case, and good luck with that. At least at least one point to make here is, if the anti-realist views are true and that poses challenges for persuading people, tough shit. Like then it's hard to persuade people. If a view is false, then it's false. So it may be that let's just say it was easier to persuade people to act in accord with your moral standards if you convince them that moral realism is true and that their actions would be stance independently wrong. Let's say that's more likely to get someone to not do something that you consider bad than if you try to convince them as an anti-realist and without appealing to that. Okay, so maybe moral realism is more persuasive rhetorically or whatever. That doesn't make it true. So we got to keep these questions separated. And it looks like people are just not being super careful with doing that.
Don't really have a good way to address that.
Probably all agree like slavery is bad.
Oh, but then as far as how to address the question of like how to get people to do morally what you want them to do or not, I think anti-realists are generally going to have no problem with this. It's an intersubjective appeal to people's own interests. And what you would try to do is say, hey, acting in this way wouldn't be in your own interests, on reflection. And so if someone pushes back against the anti-realist by saying, what if it would be in their interests? Yeah, what if it would be? Well, then maybe they're not gonna do whatever it is you're trying to persuade them to do. They're incorrigible, they're unreachable. Do realists think that they have a huge advantage over this? Do they think that you convince people of realism and then they just suddenly snap in a line? I'm not so sure of that. I mean, it's an empirical question, ultimately, which of these positions is more capable of swaying people.
Situation. And Alex O'Connor, and respectfully so, said, yeah, that's kind of a problem for my belief system in emotivism. We don't really have a good way to address that.
Probably all agree like slavery is bad, right? Well, how come God in the Bible is okay with it? Leviticus 25:44. God told his people they can get slaves. The point being, though, if you're saying slavery is bad, yeah, but maybe what if God says it's okay? Then, well, now we don't even know. Now maybe slavery is okay in some context. Your morality, hold on, wait. Because it's harming other people and you're taking away people's free will.
Yeah, so Hunter's making a mistake here. So when the person's saying, why do you think that it's bad? They could clarify what they're trying to ask there, but ultimately the dispute here is a metaethical dispute. The dispute comes down to if you're not grounding, I hate that term, if you're not endorsing some sort of theistic realist conception of what's morally right or wrong, and you're appealing to some secular conception of what's morally right or wrong, you're still going to have to get clear on what it means for something to be right or wrong. And I think that's what the people asking the question are getting at, because if you ask, for instance, why is slavery wrong, and the response is because it's harmful to the person that is enslaved, the natural response to this is, okay, but why is it morally wrong to harm people? So what you're doing here is there's a sort of applied instance of an action, which is to enslave someone. And then that is on normative moral grounds wrong. So your normative moral theory holds that all else being equal, it's wrong to harm people, that it's not necessary, or whatever. There'd be some other constraints or considerations. Obviously, like causing some physical harm to perform a surgery or in self-defense, that could be justified on most reasonable normative moral views. But the idea here would just be that in this case, you have this lower level instance of a particular action, and at the higher level, the more principled level, you say, okay, well, the reason this action is wrong is because it causes harm. That's still in the realm of normative ethics. It's not giving a metaethical account of what it would even mean for you to say that things are right or wrong and what standards you use to make those sorts of judgments. So I think Hunter is mistakenly conflating normative and metaethical questions. In his defense, though, the people asking these questions are not being explicit about what they're trying to ask. Maybe they will be.
You're taking away people's rights and their autonomy.
Why is that bad?
Because you can't.
You see, why is that bad? So it looks like they're asking a metaethical question.
Because you can't own another human being and have a
I was
wrong.
gonna say, but if you don't believe in religion or right and wrong, it's like, why is it bad?
Because
So if you don't believe in religion or right or wrong, so if you don't believe in religion, it doesn't entail that you don't believe in right or wrong. Moral relativists can and do believe in right or wrong. Moral constructivists, who are not moral realists, can and do believe in right and wrong. I'm a moral anti-realist. I do think things are right or wrong. Anti-realism is not the view that nothing is right or wrong. It's the view that nothing stands independently right or wrong. So a lot of people mix that up when they're criticizing people that are not moral realists. In this case, Hunter hasn't even made it clear whether he is a realist or an anti-realist. I don't know what his view is.
Because
Exactly.
it leads to a literal collapse on society. And then even if you have nothing but selfishness, hold on, wait. Even if you have nothing but selfishness, I can say, I care about me. I don't want to be a slave. So I don't want to live in a world where that's a risk for me to become a slave.
So that can explain why you don't like the idea of slavery, why you're against slavery, but it doesn't explain or offer an account of why anyone else should care about that. And I think that's the pressure people are going to put on him.
Reason this purely from selfishness. And the point about slavery, the point that I'm getting at about slavery is.
So why can't he answer the question? But that's subjective, right? So why can't he just say yes or no? So the answer for me, for whether I think something is right or wrong, is that subjective is yes, hell yes. Yeah, enthusiastic, yes. Subjective views about morality are much better than realist views about morality. And if you're a moral realist and you don't agree, bring it. I'll debate all of you. As long as you're sane and reasonable and friendly and not being a huge asshole, I'm happy to talk to realists about this. By the way, that might make it sound like I am specifically a moral subjectivist in the traditional sense. I am not. Philosopheric says, I wish I could keep watching, but time zones suck, sleep time. Yeah, I do these at all different sorts of hours, so you'll catch me at another time, but you could always watch it later too. All right, let's keep going.
Is that you're saying our morality must come from God, but yet God has done nothing when it comes to give us consistent morality, because now we don't even know if slavery is good or bad, because God said it was okay. Probably all.
This is a hilarious moment here. It's hilarious. And I love how they basically all missed the point of what that dude was saying when he was asking him those questions. So he's saying, slavery is bad. And he goes, why would you say slavery is bad? Why, on what grounds would you say that slavery is bad? And they all instantly act like this guy is defending slavery. What I think that he's actually doing is something a lot better. And again, this is kind of like the Frank Turek route. Frank Turek says, why would you say, if you're going to criticize the morality of God and, the Bible, slavery, I'm not even going to go into all that. It's not the purpose of this video, but I've done videos on that and I'll link them in the description below. If I just ask you on your moral framework, why is slavery bad? Reason number one, because it's harming other people. Okay, why is harming other people bad? Right? It's harming other people. And he says, you're taking away other people's free will. Okay, why is that bad? And so the answer, people go, well, you can't harm other people. Why is harming other people bad? Truly. Why is taking care, if God doesn't exist, there's no God moral framework and it's just us, then why is taking away someone else's free will bad? Animals take away each other's free will all the time. Animals harm each other all the time. You're taking away their rights.
Yeah, the question is really weird. Like, if there's no God, why would it be bad? There seems to be, there is very clearly some sort of implication that it would be bad if God does exist. But why? Because God disapproves? Like, what is it about God that is going to make the case for things being, again, is the question here whether things are stance independently good or bad, or just good or bad? Because if the question is how could something be good or bad without God, this is trivially easy to address. Things could be good or bad relative to the standards of individuals. They could be good or bad relative to the standards of groups. They could be good or bad in various sorts of constructivist ways. They could be good or bad with respect to some sort of relation designating account, like ideal observer theory, where you would say that what sets the standard for what's morally good or bad are the positions that a fully informed and ideally rational agent would endorse on reflection. So there are a whole bunch of positions on what makes things good or bad that are available to a secular moral anti-realist. Then that's not even accounting for all these secular realist accounts that are out there. So you have the naturalist realist accounts, you have the non-naturalist secular realist accounts. You have Humer's account, Schaefer-Landau case. There's so many of them. A majority of philosophers that would be moral realists are, not even endorsing theism. So that isn't to say that the positions are defensible, but what exactly is wrong with those positions? Now, I have a whole channel dedicated to talking about what's wrong with those positions, but I don't think throwing God into the mix is going to make the answer any easier. So I don't know why theists seem to think it's so difficult to account for morality without God, because I don't think God does much to help account for morality in the first place. So I don't know what's going on here. It seems a little presumptuous to think that you get morality with a God around like pretty easily, but you can't without God. I don't see any good. I've never seen a good argument for that. It's a very weird thing that many people in that like Christian apologetics world and that theists more generally seem to do. It strikes me as very strange. And they rarely lay out clear reasons for why one should think that they're right about this, that without God, it's especially difficult to account for what's right or wrong.
And their autonomy. Why is it wrong without God to take away someone's rights and autonomy? And someone says, because you can't own another human being. Why is it wrong if God doesn't exist to own another human being? And I love so much what an atheist will do when they hear this like Frank Turek line of questioning, when they say, why? They'll say, if you really need God, to tell you that stuff is wrong, then I don't even know what to tell you. Again, no, tell me why it's wrong, though. If we're going to build.
Seems like a pretty good point, though. Like, what would theistic, I don't know what to call them because I don't even know that they have to be moral realists, but people that think that you can't have morality, quote unquote, without God. Okay, so let's say you came to believe God doesn't exist. What would you do at that point? And what would your perspective on what's right or wrong be? Because if you stop believing in God, but you still believe that you can't have any legitimate moral system without God, do you now think it's okay to enslave people and torture people and kill people? Because that would concern me, because I used to identify as a Christian and I'm now an atheist. I didn't suddenly become like, pro baby torture or pro really evil, horrible attitudes. If theists are at risk of that happening to them, where they would adopt really horrific views or they would become morally indifferent, maybe I should be a Christian apologist, because I really, really, really don't want people to start thinking those things. I care a lot less about whether a person's a Christian or not than if they're in favor of baby torture. I'd rather people be Christians that are anti-baby torture than a bunch of atheist baby torturers. So do I have to become a Christian apologist so that I could prevent all the Christians from being evil without Christianity? Or more plausibly, is it that, hey, when people become atheists, they still don't want to do these things. Most people don't want to torture babies. That's the main thing keeping people from torturing babies is the fact that they just don't, it's just not something they want to do. It's not that they think it's objectively wrong. And if realists disagree, they're welcome to make a case that the main thing preventing all the baby torture in the world is that people think it's objectively wrong. Good luck with that. Jack S. asks, how would a non-cognitivist answer the question, but what makes X wrong? Well, it's a weird question because their analysis of wrongness is like a negative emotional attitude. So there'd be some sort of descriptive psychological account, at least for an emotivist. Or if they're some sort of prescriptivist, there would be some psychological fact about the disposition of the relevant agent that holds the relevant non-propositional attitude to issue the imperative, to go ahead and issue the imperative. So there'd be some psychological or linguistic account here. Nothing too complicated. Nero says, I don't think it's necessarily a mistake to lay out your deeper normative principles first before eventually giving your metaethical view. It's not a mistake. The problem is that the questions are a little ambiguous. It's not clear whether they're asking a normative or a metaethical question. He's interpreting it as a normative question. I think that the conversational context in which this is occurring, a metaethical interpretation is the most plausible. And he's not, like, Hunter is not picking up on that. But they didn't make it super clear. So I think everybody's kind of talking. There's a failure of communication in this conversation, to put it briefly. Yeah, Daz says the same line of questioning can apply to theists. Why is obeying God's orders the right thing? And I don't, it just pushes the question back another step, and they're still going to have to give an account that's going to look like secular moral realism.
Build a society on this, you have to be able to show somebody why they should respect that. Why should anyone else respect else just accept the majority rule, the collective beliefs? Has the collective always been right morally in history? Has the collective always done good stuff, historically speaking, in human society? So why is it wrong? Explain to me why it's wrong. And if you can explain to me why it's wrong, then on what just grounds do you hold me to your tyranny?
Yeah, when you ask for just grounds to hold you to my moral standards, what exactly are you asking for? I can just judge people by my moral standards. I don't need grounds for doing so. I just can, and I do. I don't need anyone's permission to do that. So I just reject the underlying assumption that one's moral judgment of others requires some sort of justification.
You don't believe in religion or right and wrong. Yeah. It's like, why is it bad?
Exactly. If there is no right and wrong on the objective level, a God-given right and wrong, then why is it bad?
Because it leads.
So it's very unclear what's being said. If there's no right or wrong on an objective level, then what?
Do do you hold me to your tyranny?
I was gonna say, but if you don't believe in religion or right and wrong, it's like, why is it bad?
Exactly. If there is no right and wrong on the objective level, a God-given right and wrong, then why is it bad?
Because it leads to a...
Did he say then why be good? It's very muddled at the end there. I'm not quite hearing what he's saying. So I don't know that theism gives you moral realism. Like, in other words, I don't think it follows from theism that morality is objective. You could throw in some theological views that get you there, but you don't need to. And so without morality being objective, or there's no stance independent moral facts, moral realism is false. What is the concern here? What exactly is the concern
me to your tyranny?
I was gonna say, but if you don't believe in religion or right and wrong, it's like, why is it bad?
Exactly.
Yeah. So why, when you say why is it bad, what are you asking? So if you're like, take my view. So my view about which things are right or wrong is that this is an expression of my personal moral standards. Now, if someone says, but why should I care about your standards? Hold up. When did I say, hey, everyone should care about my standards? I never made that claim. I'm just saying that my moral positions reflect my personal standards. I didn't say anything about whether you should care about that or not. So there seems to be an assumption here that everyone should care about your standards. Maybe Hunter has given that impression. I wouldn't give that impression, though. Or at least if someone had that impression from what I said, I would say, nope, I'm not saying that that's an implication of my views.
If there is no right and wrong on the objective level, a God-given right and wrong, then why is it bad?
Because it leads to a literal collapse on society.
Why is a collapse of society wrong? Why is it wrong? Again, why is that something that I should care about? I love what he said.
So for anti-realists, they can often try to persuade you by appealing to your own standards. They would say, I think on reflection, you'll find you don't want society to collapse. So there would just be an appeal to your own values. It'd be the same thing if someone's trying to mug you and like you said, you have a gun and you're like, hey, I'll get you. If you try to mug me, you threaten to defend yourself. That gives them an incentive to not try to mug you. Or if you say, hey, there's a security camera right there, you're on the camera, you'll get caught. Or if you say, hey, I have a family, don't you want to avoid hurting people that have families to care for? And, tugs on their sympathies. Persuasive methods of getting people to do what you want will typically be effective only to the extent that they appeal to that person's goals, values, and concerns. A person may or may not care about whether there are stance-independent moral facts and may or may not be motivated to comply with them. So trying to convince them of that might be effective, but it's not obvious why moral realism is more argumentatively effective than what is available to anti-realists, which is intersubjective appeals. So why should someone care about this? The argument would, so let's say I say, hey, we shouldn't live in a society where everybody steals from each other, everybody hurts each other. And someone says, but why should I care about that? The point I would try to make in most cases is you probably do care about that. So now let's proceed, on that assumption, unless you don't actually care about that. And I'd usually be right. Most people don't want to live in societies where people are doing those sorts of things. If I did encounter somebody that was a psychopath, there may not be any argumentative resources available to you, but there may not be any such resources available to realists either.
As earlier, then if that person doesn't really accept this and they're a psychopath and they should be locked up or whatever, again, why should your tyranny, your baseless moral tyranny, be something that I respect at all? Obviously, in this,
I think that the simple answer that Hunter could give here is because it's useful. It's a very good reason to employ a moral standard because it yields consequences that you want there to be. So, and if you don't, then okay, then there may not be a way to persuade you. Oh well.
And again, atheists go so ridiculous in this conversation a lot of the time. Respectfully speaking, the conversation gets so ridiculous a lot of the time. I'm obviously not defending those things. I'm obviously completely against those things. But the difference is I actually have a real framework, a framework that makes sense, that you can hold people to, that you can reason through philosophically in terms of the belief in a God. The moral argument does make sense. If there are things that we should and do recognize, like truly evil, like absolutely, then there are objectively good things. And if that's the case, there's objective good and evil, then there's a basis. There's a moral standard on the basis of which we can differentiate between those two things. Where did that come from? If it came from us, then it's not objective. It's just subjective. It's just like this guy's.
A secular realist doesn't have to think moral facts come from us. So, the moral argument has these two premises. If there's no, basically, I mean, you could put it in a modus ponens form. How would it go? What is the William Lane Craig version? He has it as a modus tollens, and it's a little weird. If God, how does it go? Let me just look it up. He always says he has this weird thing about objective moral values and duties. Like he's yeah, here it is. Put it in the chat. If God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Oh, okay. So he dropped the duty stuff. Okay. So if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Objective moral values do exist. Therefore, God exists. And so, there's two premises here. Technically, because the way these arguments work, you're going to have to accept one of the premises. And so typically there's going to be, for me, it's the condition. I would just deny that objective moral values do exist. But the whole idea, there's funky stuff with the way logic works where you end up having to accept the first premise if you want to reject the second one in the conclusion of the argument, which I covered in a video a while ago. But the general presumption here, if we step outside classical logic and what theistic realists are trying to say here, is that they're trying to say that you can't have moral realism without God. And I've just never seen a good argument for this. So why would we think that that first premise is a good premise? Yeah, I don't think you could have realism either way. So I don't have a problem accepting the premise is true. So if God doesn't exist, objective moral values do not exist. I agree. But if God does exist, objective moral values and duties don't exist. I don't think they exist either way. So I don't really have that much of a problem with that premise once you shove it awkwardly into a syllogism. But it's not like the person in this video has made any sort of compelling case for moral realism. So he hasn't really made a case for the second premise. He certainly hasn't made a case for the first premise. So, saying that the argument makes sense, depending on what that means, is a pretty low bar. Like that the sentences in, the premises and the conclusion are intelligible. That could be true, but that's a pretty low bar. I mean, this argument makes sense. If bananas exist, moral anti-realism is true. Bananas exist, therefore moral anti-realism is true. It makes sense. It's a stupid argument, but it makes sense. And, sometimes people will point out, they'll say like, oh, this argument makes sense. And this argument is valid. That's a low bar. That's the minimum for an argument. It's pretty much not an argument if it's not valid. I mean, you could say it's an argument if you want to, but invalid arguments, like, they can't work, so they're not very interesting. It's just weird when people are like, and this argument, this is something Craig does. He'll be like, and this argument is valid, as if that's like some like awesome thing that you've accomplished. I've compared it before to somebody presenting an argument and then saying, and these sentences I'm speaking are grammatical. And then it's like, what people say, whoa, shit. Oh, I better comply now. I better really sit up in my chair and listen to you because your sentences are grammatical. I mean, validity is just the grammar of logic. To say that something is valid is simply to say that you've properly structured an argument. It doesn't tell us a damn thing about whether it's a good argument or not. Yeah, Mason Colbert, a low bar bill. That's a slightly different context where he was talking about lowering the bar. Sapir says, hi, Lance. Surprised you're doing a meta-ethics stream. First time for everything. Yeah, I've never done one of these before. I've never talked about meta-ethics. So if you're tuning in for the first time, yeah, I don't really talk about meta-ethics that much. It's not that common on my channel. So this is a rare opportunity to hear what I have to say about meta-ethics. All right, let's keep going. I think we're almost done with this.
Moral standard hunters, moral standard. No, it came from outside of us. Therefore, there is a moral lawgiver, a moral standard giver. That's God.
And then even if you have nothing but selfishness,
why should I respect your selfishness?
Even if you have nothing but selfishness, I can say, I care about me. I don't want to be a slave.
Why should I care about what you want? Again, if we're all just evolved animals, why should I care about what you want? Which animal says like, hey, I'm about to eat you for food. I'm about to, destroy your young. But what do you want? Do I have your consent in this situation? I don't want to violate your autonomy, right? Animals don't have these conversations. If we're just living in this like landscape where there is no true grounding for morality, then explain to me on what basis should I care about any of your reasons? There is no basis for this. There is nothing that holds back the very worst Again, even stuff like Alex O'Connor's emotivism doesn't really account for how to handle this stuff. If the collective comes together and says it's something that you and I think is bad, like racism, for example, and says that that's going to be the way everyone goes now, that's going to be what we enforce, what we hold people to, non-racists go to jail. On what basis do you oppose that? Truly. And if it's your own selfishness, why should I care? But you see, if we have a moral standard, an objective standard that doesn't come from us, but we are all beholden to, like God, which philosophically makes sense. If it doesn't
make sense. What makes God's standards objective, and why should we follow those? So, if you're going to start saying, well, the reason we should follow God's standards is because he can impose penalties on us or there's consequences, great. Those are good reasons to follow standards. But just because the standard stands independently true, that's not a good reason to follow it. But, realists will say stuff like, but by definition, they're just the stance independent moral facts are the facts for which one has a good reason to follow them. Yeah, one has good like external or stance independent reasons. I don't care about those. Why should I? And if someone again says, well, those are they just are by definition what you should care about. Okay, well, guess what? I don't care about them. So saying I should, I don't. Too bad. So really, what I think happens when it comes to human psychology is that people are motivated by their own goals and values. And unless you can sync up whatever these stance independent or objective moral facts, unless you could sync up what these facts are with my goals and interests, I have no interest in complying with them. And I think that this is probably true of pretty much everybody. And it might be that some realists don't think this. I think that they would discover on reflection that if the moral facts were not aligned with their own goals and interests, they would have no interest in complying with them. It's awfully convenient that the moral facts that realists endorse happen to almost always coincide precisely with what they think is right or wrong on a personal level. Yeah, I don't know what objectivity is supposed to do here to help.
Please tell me why. Then now I can say, and we can reason and say, this is why, regardless of how you feel about it, this should be respected. And if you will not respect this, then there's going to be consequences. And again, this is my plea to everybody in the comments. If this all is true, explain to me why I should care. If there's no God, and this is just the framework we're working off of, explain to me why I need to care. But if it comes from just you and me, on what basis can we hold anybody?
Is that a glitch? What is that?
But if it comes from just you and me, on what basis can we hold anybody to any of it? Let me know.
So on what basis? You could just hold people to your standards if you want to. You don't need a basis. You don't need a grounding. If you're an anti-realist like me, you have preferences about what you want the world to be like, and you act according to those preferences. You try to negotiate with other people that have different standards than you, and try to make some sort of basically moral disputes become a matter of something like haggling or negotiation or diplomacy. And what you try to do is say, okay, well, I value this. What do you value? Okay, you value that. They're slightly different. How can we reach an accord where we get along with one another? And there'll be cases where you can't reach an accord with people and you get conflict. There'll be cases where you can, and you reach resolutions and you devise norms and systems and laws and you run societies. I don't see any good reason to think that you need objective moral truths to run societies or to live comfortably or to get along with other people. I've never seen a good argument for this. I don't know why it would make any difference at all to anybody. So I don't know what work realism is supposed to be doing here.
Let me know what you think. I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for this probably, but I want to know why this is wrong. Explain to me my problem with the moral framework of objective morality here. Again, let me know what you think.
Well, I mean, one problem is there are no good arguments for it. And, if you disagree, pop by my channel. Tell me what you think a good argument for it is. I'll give you my perspective on why I don't think it's a good argument. Unless I do, and you somehow persuade me more realism. But I've been around the block on this topic a bit. I was joking earlier for anybody that was like, "Wait, he just said he rarely does videos on this." It's like all my videos. What's the problem? I don't think there are good arguments for it. Depending on the type of moral realism, it's not even clear that it reflects an intelligible position. It might not just make any sense at all. For other positions, it's just completely trivial, and it's probably not one that theists are going to endorse anyway if it's some type of moral naturalism. So, what I propose is the trilemma, where I say that all accounts of moral realism are trivial, false, or unintelligible. I stand by that. I haven't seen anything that would convince me otherwise. So, yeah. So what do I think? It's going to depend on the specifics. So you'd have to give me the specifics, and I could tell you what I think is wrong with it.
And let me know what you think about the moral argument as well. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, consider supporting on Patreon.
Okay, so that's it for that video. Boom. What was that? I'm going to have to deal with that. So where is that Jubilee video? There's the Jubilee video where Sam Cedar talks about morality. So we could have a look at that. Jubilee, Sam Cedar, but what is the minute part of the video where he gets to it? Oh, I remember. I remember the person. Oh, it's set on it exactly on my computer right now. Great. Perfect. So I don't need to do anything. Cool. All right. So let me share that. You'll see what I'm talking about. You see, this is exactly the conversation I wanted it to be on, and it was already set on it. So let's have a look. Oh, there's no volume.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Okay, so I would like to touch on the religious fundamentalist aspect.
Yeah.
Are you an atheist?
I'm a Reformed Jew. I don't have a strong belief in the existence of God, but
Already, I would have a concern. Like if someone asks you a direct and fairly straightforward question, like, are you an atheist? Can't you just say yes or no, and then go on to say, whatever else, however you want to elaborate on that. Like if you're like, I don't have a strong belief in that. Like, what does that mean though? It's not very clear, his answer. If you end up saying something like I'm a Reformed Jew, or you elaborate, give a direct answer, then give the elaboration. That would be my advice for a more satisfactory way of answering questions. When someone asks you a direct yes or no question and you don't give a yes or a no, that can make you look bad. And it's often a bad move to not answer that question directly. Sometimes a direct question, yes or no, isn't the best response. If they ask you a question that you think is unclear, or you don't think that it's appropriately subject to a yes, no, I think at that point, strategically, sometimes the best thing to do is to say yes, but, or no, but, and then elaborate. But sometimes the best thing to do is to say, I've got a problem with that question, and then go meta and challenge the question. But when someone asks you a question and you give a roundabout answer that neither gives a direct response to a yes, no question or some other sort of categorical question where they're like, look, is it A or B? And you just don't say, oh, it's A, or oh, it's B. If you give a roundabout answer, it looks like you're being evasive. It doesn't look good. And so when I first listened to this, I listened to this a couple of times, I was immediately frustrated with the way that he responds, Sam Cedar here, because he doesn't even have any good reason to not give a straightforward response. Why is he responding this way? He ends up sounding like a politician that has something to hide. It's weird. I really don't like it. And like it especially when you're in this like shark pit where everybody is against you, you don't want to come off as looking vulnerable and looking like you're evasive, because that's going to look like blood in the water to people. And I think he did come off that way in this discussion, and I think it made him look quite bad. I thought his performance here was terrible, to be honest. I don't know much else about him other than a lot of people making videos about how much his engagement with the audience here wasn't good. And from what I've seen, it wasn't good. I think he should have done a lot better than this.
I don't think that religion in and of itself is bad.
Okay, so what's wrong with religious fundamentalists? So like when you said trans rights and women's rights or something like that?
Well, the problem I have with religious fundamentalists, and really more, I guess it's really theocrats, is that they want to impose their morality that comes from their religion on the rest of us. And I don't. But
morality, from your view, is going to be a preference, right? It's not morality; it's a preference.
Look at that morality. Look at the wording. Why do people do this? That
morality that comes from their religion on the rest of us. And I don't.
But morality, from your view, is going to be a preference, right?
Look at the wording. Morality, from your view, is a preference, right? That's what he says.
They want to impose their morality that comes from their religion on the rest of us. And I don't.
But morality, from your view, is going to be a preference, right?
So morality, from your view, is going to be a preference, right? So morality is a preference. Okay.
It's not morality. It's a preference.
It's not morality. It's a preference. What the hell? He immediately contradicts himself. So which is he asking? Morality is a preference, or there is no morality, just preferences that are apparently non-moral preferences? Why do people do this? So if I hold the view of an appraiser relativist and I say that my moral claims express my preferences, I am not saying there's no morality or that I don't have moral standards. I'm saying my moral standards are expressions of my preferences. They are my preferences. That's not this. What the hell kind of like make the gastronomic comparison. I always do this. Let's say I think that when I say things like pizza is delicious, I'm telling you something about my preferences. Does that mean I think food isn't good or bad? That's ridiculous. Of course, people think food is good or bad, even if they don't think there's an objective or stance-independent fact about what food is good or bad. Even if they think whether food is good or bad depends on their preferences, it doesn't mean that they don't have preferences and that they don't think that those preferences can be construed as facts about what food is good or bad. What is the problem with people not understanding morality is preferences is not the same thing as there is no morality. It's just preferences. Those are different claims. And he says two different things that flatly contradict one another back to back. Very, 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 very frustrating.
Preference.
What's
So morality without a foundation is going to reduce you to a preference.
well,
Morality without a foundation is going to reduce you to a preference. It's a little weirdly phrased. But, you know, I think my moral standards are my preferences. So I wouldn't have an issue with that. So like my response to that would be, yep. And what's the issue with that? And then, you know, I at that point, I think all hell would break loose with an audience like this, where they would think that this is something to scoff at and balk at, as if I'm going to give a, you know, a flying shit, whether they would scoff and balk, as if that's going to be any sort of argument. So what's the problem with construing morality as preferences?
I have a foundation for my morality.
Which is what?
I have a foundation for my morality. So this talk of foundations, it's all kinds of unclear, underspecified.
It's a humanist vision of what basically creates as little suffering as possible for as many people.
Okay, so you're like a consequentialist, utilitarian.
I don't really bother myself with being a consequentialist or a utilitarian.
It sounds like Sam doesn't know what his own normative moral standards are. It's a little weird to get into to voluntarily, like, how does he get invited to something like this? So he got invited to this discussion. He seems to not understand meta-ethical questions when they're posed. He seems to have very little clue about normative. Sorry, I think it froze there. He seems to have very little clue about normative ethics at all. He seems completely unequipped to address basic questions about his moral views. He doesn't seem to know anything about meta ethics. He doesn't seem to know anything about normative ethics. Why is he here? He seems totally unprepared to have this discussion. I don't know who any of these people are or what the hell the prompt is. And I can guarantee you, bet my life on it, guarantee you, that I could do a much better job than he's doing here. Why don't they invite me onto Jubilee? I would talk to all 20 of these people. I don't even need prep. Bring any 20 people you want. Don't tell me who they are or what we're going to be talking about. And I would still do better than this. And I'm not even saying I'm the best person to handle this sort of thing. Why? How did he get on here? He's not good at this. And, you know, watch the rest of the video. He just didn't do well here. He's awkward. He's slow to respond. He doesn't give direct answers to questions. He seems to fumble and grasp for what to say. He seems like he doesn't know what his position. All his positions seem equivocal and weak. They all just seem very, very tepid. Like he doesn't have any firm stance on anything. And to go into the lion's den as, what is this, like a progressive talking to Trump supporters from the title along the top. I remember watching parts of this, but I don't remember thinking much about specifically what this was all supposed to be about. To go into that lion's den in a way that seems totally unprepared, and then to give these waffly kinds of answers where, you know, he sounds like a politician that doesn't want to like reveal that he was, you know, up to no good or something, like taking money on the side. Why is he sounding like this? Why is he sounding evasive to like really low tier questions? Like, and that's not, I'm not even directing an insult at the guy asking the questions. It's like the guy is being firm. And keep in mind, by the way, that the way that this is structured is they get voted out if they're not doing well. So if the guy that's questioning Sam here seems like he's very firm, very brusque, very curt, it could be he's a super rude person. I have no idea. But he's in a context where if he doesn't get to the damn point right away, he can lose his opportunity to talk to Sam at all. And so I can understand kind of the haste and the impatience that he has in this context. But when you're under those circumstances, you got to go in strong. You got to go in swinging. You got to go in prepared to answer questions. You don't have to be rude to people, but be firm, be responsive, be reactive, be direct. Sam's responses here make his side look bad. Do you think, like, if you surveyed the 20 people here, and imagine he maintained a consistent performance like this throughout, do you think any of those people will come out of there having more respect for the rival political position? Because I don't think that they would. I think they go out thinking that the rival position's proponents are confused. that they have very few staunch principles that they stand by, and that they don't even really know what they think or why they think it. They would come away anti-impressed, like really, really like with a negative impression, and that's bad for people that are proponents of progressive views. You would think that they'd want to put someone in here that can handle this situation a lot better.
It's always going to reduce you to a preference. So if you say that killing is wrong and I say it's right, you would really have no contention with that.
Well, no.
Whoa, that doesn't follow. So, if moral facts reduce to preferences and you're an appraiser relativist, just because someone has a contrary preference doesn't mean you're not going to have a contention with it. You could say, nope, I contend your preference. I don't approve of your preference. I'm against your preference. So if you think moral facts reduce to preferences, your preferences can be universal in scope that can apply to other people's actions and conduct. And you could have a preference that nobody anywhere does something that's out of accord with your moral standards. And you could be against other people doing so and impose your standards on them, or try to impose your standards on them when they act out of accord with those standards. You're not obligated to be an agent relativist that doesn't care what other people do, morally speaking. That is not an implication of thinking that morality is a matter of preference. So the person questioning Sam here is now making a rather titanic blunder and it's a very common blunder, which is thinking that anti-realism leaves you with some sort of crude agent relativism. It doesn't. Agent relativism is a ridiculous view that doesn't makes very little sense. It's hard to defend, and I don't know of anybody that defends it. And yet, for whatever reason, critics of anti-realism often seem to think that your only option is some type of agent relativism. It's not. And they often seem to think even if you're a relativist, your only option is agent relativism. It's not. So what he just said here is not true. Take a look at that again.
Being a consequentialist or a utilitarian.
It's always going to reduce you to a preference. So if you say that killing is wrong and I say it's right, you would really have no contention with that.
Well,
so if you say killing is wrong and I say killing is right, you would have no contention with that. It sounds like he's saying you would have no contention with the fact that I don't think killing is wrong. That's not an implication of being an anti-realist. You could just have a problem with other people being okay with murder.
No, I don't base.
You see how he's where is the answer here?
It's my understanding of civil society on religion. And so we have a civil society. Okay. We have laws that we have decided as a society in a democratic way. And for some people, it's okay for it to be informed by their religion. That's okay.
Okay, perfect. So if tomorrow society comes together and we say, hey, trans folks don't deserve rights, you would be okay with that?
No, I would be against it, but I mean, it would be
morally right under your
view. Not morally.
So he's allowing this person to say it would be morally right under your view. He's allowing this person to give the impression that he, Sam, is some sort of agent relativist that thinks that what's morally right or wrong is determined by consensus or majority. And so that if a majority of people think a thing, then that makes a thing right. And so what this guy is doing is not a good way of arguing. I don't know who this person is. They are presuming to know what Sam's views are, even though Sam has not articulated any such view, and then saying, so on your view, I mean, it's very Cathy Newman-esque, right? You're right. Remember the Cathy Newman and Jordan Peterson discussion where Cathy Newman's like, so you're saying this, and Sam hasn't said that, and this person is attributing a view to him that I doubt he holds, that he thinks that whatever society thinks, whatever the majority of people think in a society, that makes it good for that society. Sam isn't committed to that, and he hasn't said anything that implies that he thinks that. So the proper response at this point, if it's true that he doesn't think that, and I suspect it is hold up, I didn't say that, and I don't think that. You are falsely attributing a view to me. You should retract that because I don't think that. And I don't know what this guy would say, but I doubt he would retract it. I think he would say, nope, that's an implication. And Sam would not be prepared, I doubt, to explain why that's not an implication of his views. This is a crude, presumptuous, and very, very misguided set of metaethical presuppositions that this person is operating with. He's wrong, probably. Maybe Sam thinks that, but I don't know if there was something earlier in this conversation, because it's 27 minutes into it, where Sam gave the impression that he's some kind of agent relativist. Maybe Sam would be committed to that. But then at that point, the proper response is, yep, I'm committed to that. And then you just say, yeah, that's an implication of my view, and you accept it. So you got a couple options here. One is to push back and say, no, I don't think that. And the other is, yeah, I think that. What of it? Too bad. Yeah, that's what I think. What's wrong with that? It's not to give equivocal, waffly responses.
Right. No. I'm not talking about morals.
Okay,
here.
So Sam makes a insane move here. He's not talking about morals. The conversation is about morality. What does he mean he's not talking about morals? That's what the guy's asking him about. What does he mean he's not talking about morals?
Here's where I'm getting to, right? Religious foundations provide an ethical framework for one to live their life off
I
of.
believe you can have an ethical
Okay.
framework without
And
religion.
if we take the leftist view to its logical tail end, to its extreme view, you have low reproductive birth rates. You have a reproductive dead end. So two men together can't reproduce unless they have to take from a healthy straight couple. Religion provides this foundation where you do prioritize the nuclear family.
So do you have a problem with gay people being married?
It's not that I have a problem. I just don't see a justification for why they ought to be gay outside of ages.
Okay. A justification for why they ought to be gay. What can I even say to that? As if people need a justification for why they ought to be. Oh my God. I mean, wow. All right. Yeah, okay. I think that's enough of this. Yeah, I don't know if I would have lost my shit at that point, but I might have started laughing at that one and pivot the conversation to that, because that is a absolutely wild claim to make. Wow. All right. Well, for whoever, I don't know what the Jubilee thing is or who runs it, but I'm happy to come on there to talk about moral realism and anti-realism and defend myself as an anti-realist. So there. Can I submit an application somewhere? I'd be happy to do it. Wait, do I have to fly out somewhere and talk to people in person? Where is this? Ugh. Well, I'd do it. Whatever. I don't care. All right. Oh, what's up? We got Nathan. Unfortunately, Nathan, I'm going to have to go pretty soon. Let me check something. Okay, yeah, I'm going to have to go pretty soon. Yeah, Ben Singleton says the prompt at the top of the screen is unless you're a fundamentalist or xenophobic nationalist, voting for Trump was a mistake or something like that. It's not a debate on metaethics. Well, you should still be prepared to talk about metaethics. Everybody should. All right. Digital Gnosis is addressing this. Yeah, I left my justification in my wallet. Oh my God, people in the comments getting very juvenile. Mason says, can I buy my philosophical justification with Lance Luke? You don't need the justifications. That's the lesson that I want people to get out of this stuff. Your moral you don't need justifications for your moral standards. You can just have them, just like your taste preferences. Just imagine how silly it would be if it, because my favorite color is purple. If someone to say, someone said, what's your justification for that? What the hell are they asking me? I like purple. I'm not going to give you, I don't owe you something. Justifications are like, you could have justifications relative to some standard you want to conform with. And then there's like social justifications. You could justify your actions to other people, but there's no like magical justification where you're not you're not allowed to believe something or to do something or to be a certain way or have a certain preference unless you're justified. Like there's this mystical standard or threshold you have to cross to be permitted. Permitted by who? So, if realists say, but Lance, you're not justified in imposing your moral standards on other people. Well, if I had like an Iron Man suit and I could just go impose my moral standards on people with really like if people committing genocide or something, I'd show up and be like, yeah, you could stop doing that, whatever. People have hero fantasies. Obviously, that's not going to happen. But like if they were like, but what's your justification? You're an anti-realist. I don't need one. I'm not going to give up. Oh, sorry. I didn't bring my justifications for stopping you from doing terrible things. I guess I just won't stop you. No, I'd stop people because I don't want them to do it. That's my reason for doing it. And if you don't consider that a justification, then I don't have a justification. I don't think I need one. Why would I think I need a justification? Now someone says, but you do have to have a justification. Do you have an argument for that? Because like, why do I have to agree? What if I don't agree with that? Like, someone could say, oh, but you have to agree with that. Okay. Why do I have to agree with that? I could always question, and pretty much we could just keep working our way up the chain of the infinite potential regress of demands about what I supposedly have to do or must do or am required to do. And, I could just not do that. So now what are you going to do? I'm not obligated to follow other people's philosophical views. All right, everybody, I'm going to have to go there for now. I think that's going to be it for today. That was a lot of fun. I don't think that there's much else to this discussion here that has metaethical relevance. So we'll cut that out. I'm sorry, Nathan, for having to pop out of here right when you got here. But I got stuff to do. I know there's a lot of people in the stream, but hey, we'll keep this one just a bit shorter than they typically are today. All right, everybody, that was a lot of fun. The time really flew by on that one. That was really an hour and 20. That's wild. All right, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I got to go pick up my wife and go make dinner and do a bunch of other stuff. So I'm not going to be back tonight. But thanks, everybody, for being here. And yeah, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done all that already. Like the video. What else? Leave a comment in the comment section. Share the video around. Do all the standard stuff. To everybody, the land salute, hold on to that. We'll find something for you to do with it. And I will see you all next time. I have no idea when I'm going to be here next. So I'm going to pop in here randomly from now on, I guess. But everyone, take care.